Hi, I'm Mieke, and in this session I'm going to show you how to define a table in a data miner protocol. Now, first let's have a look at the end result, so it will give us a bit of an idea how it should look like, and it will also help us identify the different components needed in our definition. So let's go to data miner and have a small peek. For example, in this element I have a table with just 3 columns, but it will do the trick for our purpose. So the first thing that pops in mind is that I will need to define somehow that I have 3 different columns. We can also see a small key next to this first column called instance. This actually indicates that this column will be our unique identifier for this particular row. So I can see 1, 2, 3, and 4. Next to that, I have some information and I actually have some status values which are alarmed. So let's have a look as well on the alarm console. What can I see there? I can see sports is busy, movie time scheduled. But sports and movie time isn't my primary key, so I will probably need a link somewhere in our definition. Now, the nicest thing about that linking that we will need to define is that I can use it in my template as a filter. For instance, I actually only want an alarm for movies. So let's have a filter called movie, apply it. You can see my sports is already gone. Let's have a look at the end result. I only see scheduled as an alarm in there. Okay. Let's just take a step back, think about what you just saw. We saw a frame which had different columns in there. We needed a primary key, we needed a linking somehow to make sure that we can filter on our alarms, and of course we will need our rows in there. Now, rows are dynamic, so I will need to gather that information somewhere. So in our definition, I will not define how many rows, it's the real-time information. I will need frame, columns in there, primary key, and somehow a definition to link that to my alarm value. Let's have a look in the definition itself. Here we can actually already see a lot of text in there, so it might be scary a bit. Let's just forget about the code behind and let's go and use this nice little option to see what a table looks like. So it's called a table editor. You can open it up here as well. We can open it up in here. Now, this looks already a bit familiar. We have a table, we have 3 columns, and what's this below item? It's actually what we're going to display. So we could have internal information and we can display specific columns, so make it available for external items as well. For instance, I could say, well, I just want to hide that status information, so it will get rid of this little list here. In our example, we do want to see every single item in there. Now, what else do we see is that I have this small key in here as well. And remember, we had a small key in our data miner result. Well, this key is actually indicating that somehow we defined that this column should be my primary key. Okay, now let's have a look at the code itself. What we see here is param 100 again. This is our frame. You can see columns in here. This is the definition in our frame. This is the columns that we're going to use, and they actually link to different params as well. Now, each column is defined by a param. So you can see here 101, 102, 103. Don't yet worry about the different coding in there. This means that we have our frame, 100, and columns. So we will need to indicate that 101 is actually our first column, 102 is a second column, and so on. So we do that by using the IDX 0 is 101, IDX 1 will go to 102, 2 to 103. Now remember, we needed primary key somewhere as well. We needed to identify what the index is, the primary key, the row identifier, whatever name you want to give it. Well, we do that by using index equal to the IDX you want to use as your primary key. Of course, it's best practice to use the first column as your primary key. It will make more sense when you look at it. It makes more sense when developing things. So I haven't identified 0 as my index. What else do I see here is an option called naming. What might that be? Well, you can see that this is going to link to 102. Let's have a look what the 102 actually was. Let's go to the table editor again. 102 is my name. So maybe this is a definition to make that linking. Naming does define the display key. What's display key? I'm going to use this as my unique key on display. So let's go back to Data Miner and have a look there. We could see name, movie time, and we can see that movie time in our alarm as well. That means that this is my displayed primary key. Couldn't really call it primary key because that's confusing with the real primary key. So that's why we call it display key. All right. Let's get back to the code itself. Remember, we have our table, our frame itself, and our columns in there. Maybe let's have a look at the columns. Column definition reminds us of any standalone development. So we have, for instance, a read param going on in here, and it should be interpreted by Data Miner as text. We will make sure it's displayed, so it has to be available in our table so we can see it on screen, and I'm going to represent it as text as well. So this is something that we can use inside the table to sort on as text. Another example that we have is our status, which is internally actually a number. We will display it as something different. We have a number representing something. So in this case, we have 0 representing pending, we have 1 representing scheduled. So this is all very similar to the standalone params that we've seen before. And we're going to use this info to really understand how a table is defined. We can see similarities in here. We have a type, and this time it's not a read or a write. It's actually an array. It's a combination of columns. It's a combination of those readable components in there. So it's an array of params. We have a display in here. We're going to make sure it's available. And remember, our columns did not really have a page on there. I'm not going to show my columns on a page. I'm going to show my columns in a table. So I'm going to display my table, that frame, on a specific page. In this case, it's my general page. Of course, table can be displayed on multiple pages. Now, the one thing that is a bit tricky here is the measurement. I'm not going to show a table as text or as a number or as a date time. It has a lot more options in here. I will need to identify the columns, the order, sorting, whatever is in there. Now, it might seem a bit strange to all put this in one line of options. You can make a lot of mistakes in there. So that's why we have that table editor in there. So let's have a look. Table editor, we have a displayed columns layout. This is actually going to change that long textual information that we just had in that options. For instance, I can change my status to a different order. We can change the status to be earlier in our table or shown earlier in our table. I could say I would like to change that width of that column so it will have a bigger frame to show. Or I can say I'm going to make sure that it's sorted on this and so on. I can even put other sorting somewhere and then I can put a priority in there. So basically whatever setting I'm doing here, it will have an effect on my measurement, my options. How am I going to display things? Now there's one difference in here. We can see I have a histogram, heat map indication, and even the headers in there. These are options that will be added, not in the measurement, would get too big otherwise. It will be added to the options in my column. Might be a little bit difficult to really see the difference in there, and that's why that table editor will really help. Instead of you defining where that option should be, you can just click on, well, I would like to have, for instance, the histogram in here, or I would like to have the heat map. Of course, this is now a discrete, so I cannot enable this, but you can just select it and the Data Miner Integration Studio will put it on the right place. Now, I'm just going to keep my table as it was, so I'm not going to save my changes. So basically this is going to be updated, or it's going to add some options in here. What are these options? You can see that I have a save here, save option. Well, what will it do? Obviously it will store something. Now, why would I not put save here and in the other one? So what are these columns? I have column 102, which is my display key, and I have 101, which will be my primary key. Now, by default, primary key and display key are stored automatically. So I don't need to put save. I can put it, but there will be no difference. It will automatically store that information. Now, let's put that to the test and have a look. So I didn't change my development. I didn't change my driver and upload it. It's all the same as just before. I can just go ahead and restart and see if my data is still there. It is. Now, how am I storing this information or making sure it's available? At some point you will need to retrieve it somehow, but in my case, I just have a populate button. So whenever I click on the button, my data will be filled in into my table. That means that I'm currently in control. I'm not pulling it from any data source somewhere. Even when I would, I could still use the same logical structure or definition. So what would be the difference in there? I will have different type. So let's have a look what the different types are. We see retrieved in this case, it means that I'm fully in control. So even when I would retrieve it from a data source, I can still have logic to parse that information, do something with it, and then store it in that table I would like to visualize. So I'm in control. With I'm meaning my logic and my driver itself and my protocol. So in my case, I have a button. You can see that one over here, a button populate table. This button will actually trigger a quick action and it will just store the information in there. So this could be pulling information, translating it to something readable, and then store it into that table. So I will have retrieved in here. Now, there's a bit of a tricky thing here. You can do this with retrieved, but also with custom option. So whenever I would put custom here, I'm still showing that I will be in control. It's just the way I'm going to add that information will be different. With retrieved, I have the possibility to store multiple cell or row values for that columns. So I could say, well, let's just change the entire column. Every single row of that column will be updated. For custom, I'm only going to update one cell at a time. So you can choose, based on the situation, what to use, custom or retrieved. In my case, I'm going to populate the entire table at once, so I can put this back to retrieved. I also talked about SNMP information, so I can change my table to be an SNMP table. So I'm going to pull information at a specific rate, for instance, or with using a specific method. And in that case, my columns will be an SNMP column. I can link it to a specific location on my device and then retrieve that information. But that's for a different session. In this case, I'm just showing you what the different options are in the type. So I can have retrieved, custom, or SNMP. Those are my basic definitions. I have a type, options, save. Now imagine I'm going to change this. I'm going to remove that save and I'm going to publish my information and then see what happens when my element restarts after seeing I have a different driver. You can see my status is now empty. My instance, my primary key, my display key are all stored.